is one of the two regions with MENA, but basically the region of the world where not only is the HIV epidemic continuing to grow, but grows the fastest. And if you look back to the last 15, 20 years, basically the progress has been minimal, if any, in a number of countries of the region. The progress has been unequal. Some countries, and actually Ukraine, has made real progress despite the war and very difficult conditions, but other countries are either stalling or see their situation deteriorating, and that's the Russian Federation. I will be happy to expand on any of the things I'll be mentioning here, but let me say right away that the information about what's happening in the Russian Federation now is more and more difficult to obtain. Overall in the region, there's an estimated 2.1 million people living with HIV, and the number of new infections, the incidence, according to the latest UNAIDS report, is 140,000. And this is somewhere around 40%, if not more, growth since 2010, in the last 10 years. If you read carefully the UNAIDS report, you'll see that this year they say it's a 20% increase as compared with 2010. Last year they were saying it's a 50%. And the reason why this is so confusing is because the numbers in Russia have changed, and let me say, in short, they've been manipulated. So I can expand again more, but just keep in mind that we're somewhere around a 40, 50 overall % increase in incidence since 2010, and that is also true for AIDS-related deaths. There are 4 countries in the regions that together account for 90 or over 90% of all new infections, and that is the Russian Federation, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. And of course, Russia is the elephant in the room with more than 50% of these new infections. There are a number of reasons why the situation is not good. These factors all are interconnected and sort of adding one on another. The first is that, and that's a long story, there's no real political leadership on the issue, and HIV hasn't been on the political agenda. HIV has been left to ministries of health, and ministries of health are powerless in many of these regions, and whatever is about drug issues, and drugs is 30 to 50% of the HIV infections in the regions. Everything that has to do with drug issues is with the Ministry of Interior. Second, there is an evolving political context of polarization, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. Russia is influencing neighboring countries that are part of the Eurasian economic space. Russia is funding health, but it's also funding security and ministries of interior, and it's funding propaganda, and it's conducting a rapid Russification, yes, of occupied territories. And we know from 2014 and what happened in Crimea, and then in the Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts, that harm reduction interventions close, and that civil society can't operate anymore. So that influence is clear, and it's growing across the region. And this is happening in a political context where people in the region, again, I'm talking about overall situation, many people feel uncomfortable. They feel uncomfortable with their past, but they're unclear about what they want for the future. If you think of countries like Moldova or Georgia, and maybe Natalia will speak about Kyrgyzstan, you know, it's about 50% of the people who look west somehow, and 50% of the people who look east, and Russia. So there is a sort of discomfort politically, which is of course exploited by the propaganda. So far with the politics. Then of course the AIDS response is underfunded, dramatically underfunded, with low domestic funding and decreasing funding from international donors. Third, and Andrei alluded to that, it's an epidemic of key populations. 92% of the infections in Eastern Europe and Central Asia are among people belonging to or sex partners of key populations, particularly people using drugs, injecting drugs, and men having sex with men. But the laws and policies across the region come as major obstacles to services. As you know, sex work, possession and use of drugs, same-sex relationships are criminalized in most countries of the region, which is a major issue, and the stigma and discrimination are also highly prevalent, and including, unfortunately, I must say, in healthcare. And the situation is worsening if you think of recent anti-LGBT propaganda laws taken in Kyrgyzstan, and about to be adopted in Georgia, for example. Then there is an overall, all of that is happening on an overall very low background of coverage in terms of focused testing, in terms of prevention. Andrei mentioned PrEP. Harm reduction is extremely, at extremely low levels. Low coverage with care. If you look at the cascade, the overall cascade, 1995, 95, 95, in the region, it is 59, 50, 42, yeah? So we're in a region where 60% of people living with HIV are actually transmitting, yeah? And finally, two other points. One is the civil society space that is shrinking for the reasons I've been discussing. And you may see here at the conference many of our former friends and colleagues with whom we were working in the Russian Federation who have now left. They're in Georgia, they're in Germany. And therefore some spaces are left without the strength of the civil society. And finally, there's the war in Ukraine. And the war has profound consequences. It's affecting greatly, of course, health systems and delivery of services in Ukraine. And yet, as you will hear from Andrei, despite the challenges, the government and the community systems have really shown extraordinary resilience in Ukraine and innovations in service delivery. But across the EECA, we see the economic consequences of the war that are impacting the health budgets and the health systems. And this is particularly true for countries that have a large migrant labor force in the Russian Federation. And finally, the huge migration of people out of Ukraine to Western Europe has also affected a number of health systems, shaken health systems, for example, in Poland, in Moldova, to name one or two. So this is really a dear image of the region, and I'm sorry that I'm unable to report really significant overall progress as compared to what we discussed in Montreal at the last conference. Where I see the hope is really with some of the extraordinary people that we're meeting, yes? Some remarkable professionals working in hugely difficult circumstances, and an extraordinary vibrant civil society and community that shows remarkable resilience. So that gives us all hope that at the end we will overcome.